You can't really talk about the golden age of science fiction without mentioning Jack Arnold. Originally a vaudeville dancer and Broadway actor in the 1930s, he quit the acting scene to enlist in World War II after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. He wanted to be a pilot, but was instead put into the Signal Corps, where he learned about cinematography and documentary filmmaking. After the war, Arnold and his friend Lee Goodman formed their own production house, Promotional Films Company, and made documentary films and fundraisers for numerous non-profit organizations. After the two men received an Academy Award nomination for their documentary With These Hands, Jack Arnold began working with Universal International. Throughout the 1950s, Arnold made some of the biggest sci-fi films of the era, including It Came from Outer Space, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and Tarantula. His greatest hit, and probably his greatest film, came in 1957 after he had read a screenplay from a young writer named Richard Matheson about a man facing a rather unusual problem.
Scott Carey is getting smaller. After being exposed to dangerous pesticides and an inexplicable cloud of deadly radiation, he has come down with a horrible affliction unknown to all fields of medical science. As his body gradually makes him more and more diminutive, he loses his job, finds his marriage strained, and eventually winds up living in a dollhouse, racked by the insatiable fear that he will never stop shrinking. There, he is attacked by his own house cat and forced into the basement, where he finds himself so small that he seeks shelter in an empty matchbox and must engage in lethal combat with a common spider.
Before we go any further, if you could please hit that like button, you'll save me from getting lost in the basement of YouTube obscurity. If you really do like this video, go ahead and subscribe to get more content. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. In the mid-50s, after finishing his post-apocalyptic sci-fi vampire novel I Am Legend, Richard Matheson began working on a novel called The Shrinking Man. Matheson sold the movie rights to Universal International before the novel was even finished, on condition that he write the screenplay himself. When producer Albert Zugsmith got the screenplay, which was Matheson's first, he was, according to some reports, unhappy with its structure. Matheson had apparently kept the novel's format, in which the story unfolds through flashbacks, and had kept certain salacious details in place that were a bit too risque for 1950s Hollywood, including a scene with an overt pedophile and another scene in which the protagonist peeps on an adolescent girl. Zugsmith tacked the word incredible onto the title, and then instructed Matheson to rewrite it with a more conventional format and without the charged scenes. It's worth noting that he had no problems with the unconventional ending, but we'll get to that a little later. Depending on which source you follow, either Matheson did as he was told, or the job of reworking the screenplay was given to Richard Allen Simmons. Either way, Simmons did eventually clean up Matheson's script, though how much is a matter of contested opinion. In the final film, Matheson is given the sole writing credit. The movie was given a hefty but not overly high budget of as much as $800,000, and Zugsmith could think of only one man for the job of directing, Jack Arnold. While Arnold had proven to be commercially successful and was well respected in Hollywood circles, critics were lukewarm on him, often calling his work schlocky and unserious. However, he was very adept with action and special effects, as proven not only in his well-known sci-fi films, but also in his many westerns. The Incredible Shrinking Man, Zugsmith knew, would aim more for crowd-pleasing spectacle than critical acclaim, and Arnold agreed to do it. To get the visuals and effects right, Jack Arnold opted for an exceptionally long period of pre-production amounting to around 8 months, during which he and his team of effects experts, including the likes of Cleo Baker and Roswell A. Hoffman, who had worked together before on This Island Earth and The Invisible Man, along with prop man Ed Keyes, who'd done work on Frankenstein and the Flash Gordon serial, put in many hours coming up with the methodology behind the film's complex visual and special effects. A lot was done with enlarged sets and props, forced perspective, realistic mats, rear projection, and some of the best compositing work of the era. For the spider that serves as the primary antagonist toward the end of the film, the script called for a Black Widow, but that proved to be a logistical nightmare for multiple reasons, so Arnold, who had just finished working on Tarantula, opted to use a tarantula instead. Universal's publicity department claims that the spider seen in the film is the same tarantula Arnold used for the earlier film, a specially trained arachnid named Tamara, but this is probably not true, or at least not entirely accurate, with some reports claiming that dozens of individual tarantulas were used, with several of them dying under the exposure of the hot stage lights. For the cat sequence, which was similarly done with multiple identical animals, though thankfully none of them perished, they filmed the animal action first, and then had the actor memorize those movements in order to react to the enlarged house pet without breaking continuity. One problem that led to an awkward conversation between Jack Arnold and the Universal production office was the creation of giant drops of water for this scene, which was accomplished using water-filled condoms on a slow-moving treadmill. When the production office noticed the line item in the budget for 100 gross of condoms and asked Arnold what the devil it was for, he cheekily explained that he decided to throw a post-wrap party for the cast. When it came to casting, Zug Smith originally wanted the lead role to go to Irish actor Dan O'Herlihy, known at the time for Orson Welles' Macbeth, 1952's Invasion USA, and 1954's Robinson Crusoe. But if you're anything like me, you'll probably recognize him as Connell Cochran in Halloween 3, or as the chief executive of Omnicorp in RoboCop. O'Herlihy turned down the role of Scott Carey, though, fearing that he'd be typecast as a loner after his Oscar-nominated turn as Robinson Crusoe. So instead, the role went to the relatively unknown Grant Williams, who had worked with Jack Arnold before on Red Sundown and Outside the Law, and who Universal considered a potentially major star. Alas, The Incredible Shrinking Man would prove to be Williams' most well-known work, and after Universal dropped his contract in 1959, he disappeared into relative obscurity, doing mostly guest appearances on television. It certainly can't be said that he failed to put in the effort on The Incredible Shrinking Man, though. He worked remarkably hard in the title role, paying repeated visits to the hospital for injuries incurred on set, which included being temporarily blinded by arc lights, nearly drowning, and getting electrocuted. For the female lead, Scott's wife Louise, Arnold himself cast his personal friend Randy Stewart, who had had a few minor but memorable roles to her credit, most notably in I Can Get It For You Wholesale. Unfortunately, like Williams, she would ultimately become known only for The Incredible Shrinking Man, and would go on to be an obscure television actor for the next 2 decades. Bizarrely, the only truly notable human performer in the entire film is the Terror of Tiny Town's own Billy Curtis, who has little more than a glorified cameo. Probably in an effort to keep the bulk of the budget earmarked for the effects, the rest of the cast is made up of undistinguished character actors, who don't even have the notoriety of the credited lead feline performer Orangey, who earned 2 Patsy Awards for his roles in Rhubarb and Breakfast at Tiffany's. Yes, they had Oscars for animals, they later had ceremonies and everything, but no, I'm not going to take you down that rabbit hole today. Filming took place over 2 months in mid-1956, not including the extensive pre- and post-production. When Universal International executives saw the first cut, they were largely pleased with it, but they took exception to the ending, which, spoiler alert, is not what you'd expect. Scott is never able to demonstrate to his wife that he is still alive, and he isn't miraculously cured at the last minute to be made normal-sized again. Instead, he goes on shrinking until he essentially becomes one with the universe. He delivers a final voiceover narration, written by Jack Arnold himself, that gets quasi-religious and deeply philosophical, and which Matheson disliked.
I meant something too. To God, there is no zero. I still exist.
Arnold fought really hard to retain this ending, though, even agreeing to competing test screenings, one with his ending and one with a more traditional conclusion. Audiences weren't entirely sold on Arnold's ending, but the results of the test were good enough that Universal International eventually relented and allowed the more surreal ending to stay in the final cut. The film released wide in April of 1957 to moderately above average reviews and a box office draw of $1.43 million, making it one of the highest grossing science fiction films of the decade, behind 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and The Thing from Another World. Preliminary work started on a sequel called The Fantastic Little Girl, again penned by Matheson, which involved Scott's wife Louise shrinking while Scott battles with weird eel-like creatures in the microscopic world, but that didn't get much beyond the early stages of development. It got a pseudo-remake in the gender-swapped comedy The Incredible Shrinking Woman with Lily Tomlin in the 80s, and another remake was in development in the early 2000s with names like Eddie Murphy and Brett Ratner involved. Shortly before his death in 2013, Richard Matheson himself worked on a remake script with the help of his son, but nothing has been publicized about the project ever since. Regular viewers of this channel should know that I'm not opposed to remakes on principle. In fact, some of the best films I've covered here have been remakes, but this is not what I'd call a prime candidate for the remake treatment. That's because The Incredible Shrinking Man came out at the perfect cultural moment, and serves as a testament to societal changes America was going through in the late 1950s. While it's easy to claim that this is a nuclear panic movie or an early attempt at cosmic body horror, it's more definitively a commentary on gender politics, which is only made clearer if you read Matheson's novel. Maybe a clever writer could come up with a way to recontextualize it for a more modern spin on those same gender politics, but it would be extremely tricky. Hey, if Hollywood is willing to pay my exorbitant fee, I guess I could give it a crack. Getting back to the original though, Scott begins the movie as a strong, virile man who calls his wife wench while lying shirtless on the bow of his expensive boat. Slowly though, all of his traditionally masculine qualities are stripped away. He loses his job, his physical superiority, and becomes totally dependent on the woman of the household. Ultimately, he finds his surroundings transformed into an alien landscape and has to rediscover his strength in order to defeat the predator and win the prize of survival. He takes comfort in the fact that his existence hasn't changed as much as it first appeared to him, and that he can still exert his will over an omnipresent universe. Given where gender politics were headed in the late 50s, it's hard not to see the subtext here, that this is about a man who is facing the breakdown of comfortable norms, of how he must deal with the coming sexual revolution that threatens his masculine dominance. The movie tries to showcase some of this theme in a more direct way with the scene, sometimes cut for television, in which he considers having an affair with a little person, but most of the overtly sexual symbolism was taken out of the story in the script stage. That said, the story does shine as a thought experiment, wholly divorced from its thematic implications. It certainly wasn't the first tale about people becoming small, heck, it's not even the first movie about the subject, but it does give the matter more serious consideration than is normal. There is a worthy attempt to push the speculation in an intellectually honest direction, and even though it's relatively easy to get pedantic and argue about the physics it gets wrong, it is because of its honesty that the happy ending Universal wanted couldn't possibly have worked. It wouldn't have felt true. As with the change in gender dynamics that was barely in its infancy in 1957, there is no going back, no magic serum that can make things return to what used to be considered normal. The only way through is acceptance, coming to terms with a new paradigm that reveals itself to be no less real than the one being left behind. It's not a traditionally happy ending, but Scott ends the film on a high note, reaffirming his existence even as he dissolves to nothingness before our eyes. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What's your favorite movie about people shrinking? Is it The Incredible Shrinking Man, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Ant-Man, Fantastic Voyage, or something else? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. You can also consider joining my Patreon to get access to bonus content, get your name in the credits, and more. My patrons vote on one movie I cover every single month. Also check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty more sci-fi classics in both film and literature. Until next time though, when the world will be saved by something very, very small, This is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
To the galley, wench. Fetch me a flagon of beer.
Oh, I'm sorry, Captain, but we're all out of flagons this trip. It'll have to be a can of beer.
Out of flagons? In the name of heavens, woman, how are we to make the Philippines?